We found him sitting against a tree, perfectly preserved despite being missing for 6 months. No signs of wildlife disturbance, no decomposition. Just a man who looked like he'd fallen asleep while hiking, except for his eyes. They were open wide, staring at something above him, and his face was frozen in an expression I still see when I close my eyes at night. My name is Jack Harmon, and I've been a search and rescue officer with the U.S. Forest Service for 11 years. Most of what I do is routine: lost hikers, injured campers, the occasional evacuation during forest fires. But there are aspects of this job I was never trained for, things they don't tell you in the manuals. It's 2:48 a.m. as I write this. The rain is hammering against the windows of my cabin, and I can't sleep. Not after what happened today. Not after what I saw. I need to document everything while it's still fresh, while I can still remember the details. Because tomorrow, just like every other time, my superiors will file it away in some restricted folder and will be told never to speak of it again. I work in Black River National Forest, over 400,000 acres of dense woodland, steep ridges, and valleys that drop away into darkness. Most people think of forests as peaceful places. I used to think that too. But when you've spent as much time as I have searching for people who vanished without a trace, you start to see things differently. Today started like any other call. A hiker had gone missing. Kevin Winters, 32, an experienced outdoorsman who knew the park well. His wife reported him missing when he didn't return from what was supposed to be a simple day hike along the North Ridge Trail. Nothing unusual about the call. We get dozens like it every year. Most of the time we find them wandering off trail, confused but alive. My team assembled at 6 a.m., 4 other SAR officers, 2 with dogs. The morning fog was thick, limiting visibility to maybe 20 feet ahead. We split into pairs and headed out along different sections of the trail, equipped with radios, first aid kits, and GPS units. Andy and I took the northwestern section where Kevin's truck had been found at the trailhead. The air was damp and cold, and our voices didn't carry far in the dense mist. The dogs were agitated from the start, which is never a good sign. Strange that he'd come out here alone, Andy said as we followed the winding path. Guy knows the rules. His wife said he does this trail twice a month, I replied, scanning the ground for any sign of disturbance. Probably felt comfortable enough to solo it. 3 hours in, we found nothing. No tracks leading off trail, no discarded equipment, no signs of struggle. It was as if Kevin had simply vanished into the fog. We regrouped at midday, comparing notes with the other teams who'd had equally little success. That's when Peterson, our coordinator, made the call to expand the search grid. We go 2 miles east of the ridge, he said, pointing to sections of the map that weren't part of any established trail. Jack, you and Andy head northeast. Terrain gets rough there, but if he fell, that's where we might find him. As we pushed deeper into the forest, the trees grew thicker, the underbrush more tangled. The fog had lifted somewhat, but shadows still played tricks with your vision. Every fallen log looked like a body at first glance. Every rustling sound in the brush made us pause and listen. That's when we heard it. Help, please. The voice was faint, barely audible over the sound of our own breathing. It seemed to come from a ravine to our left, maybe 50 yards away. Hello? I called. Forest Service. Are you Kevin? No response, just silence. Andy and I exchanged glances. You heard that, right? He asked, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. I nodded, keying my radio to alert the others. Team 2, we've got a voice contact northeast sector, half click from marker 7, moving to investigate. We approached cautiously, our boots crunching on the forest floor. The ravine was steep, dropping about 30 feet to a narrow creek bed below. We scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement. Help me. The voice again. But this time it sounded wrong. There was a hollowness to it, like it was coming from inside a cave, though there were no caves in this area. And there was something else that made the hair on my neck stand up. The voice didn't echo. In a ravine like this, sound should bounce off the rocky walls, but this voice just ended. Kevin, it's the Forest Service. If you can hear us, make noise or call out again. Down here. The voice seemed to be coming from directly below us now, near the water's edge. Andy started to descend, but I grabbed his arm. Wait, I said. feeling a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something's not right. That's when my radio crackled to life. Team 2, be advised. We've got a report from county that Kevin Winter's brother just called in. Says he got a text from Kevin's phone 10 minutes ago asking for help. GPS puts the phone near the old mill site, 6 miles west of your position. I felt the blood drain from my face. I keyed the radio with a shaking hand. Copy that. But we're hearing someone down here. Can you confirm no other missing persons reports? Confirmed. You're the only team that's reported voice contact. Andy and I backed away from the ravine edge slowly, our eyes never leaving the shadowy creek bed below. The voice came once more, but this time it was different. Jack, Andy, help me down here. No one had identified us by name. No one. We retreated quickly, almost running back through the forest toward our designated rally point. Neither of us spoke about what had happened, but when we rejoined the team an hour later, Peterson took one look at our faces and pulled us aside. You heard something out there, didn't you? He asked quietly, his expression grave. Someone called us by name, Andy said, his voice barely above a whisper. No one was supposed to be out there. Peterson nodded slowly. File your report, but leave that part out. Understood? But, I started to protest. Leave it out, he repeated firmly. Trust me on this. Some things about these woods don't make it into official records. We found Kevin Winters 4 hours later, unconscious but alive, at the bottom of a steep incline near the old mill, just as his brother had indicated. He'd slipped and hit his head, then managed to send a text before passing out again. The doctor at the hospital said he'd been lucky, another few hours in the cold, and he might not have made it. But as I sit here tonight listening to the rain, I can't stop thinking about that voice in the ravine. What would have happened if we'd gone down there? And why did Peterson act like he knew exactly what we'd encountered? This isn't the first strange occurrence I've experienced in Black River. There have been others, things I've tried to rationalize away, but after today I'm starting to connect the dots. There are patterns to the disappearances, details that don't add up, and an unspoken rule among veteran SAR officers. Some things you see in the forest, you never talk about. Tomorrow I'll go back to work like nothing happened. I'll file my report with the appropriate omissions. But I'm going to start keeping my own record, documenting everything they tell us to forget. Because whatever's out there in Black River, it knows our names now. When you work search and rescue long enough, you develop instincts. You learn to read the forest, to spot the subtle signs most people miss. A broken twig, disturbed moss, the unnatural silence when wildlife senses danger. But nothing in my training prepared me for what I found during the Anderson search last week. The call came in on Tuesday afternoon. 2 teenagers, Mitch and Josh Anderson, had gone camping in the northwestern sector of Black River, an area we call Devil's Backbone because of the jagged ridge that runs through it. They were supposed to return Sunday evening. When they didn't show up by Monday night, their parents reported them missing. Standard protocol for these situations, we gathered their information, last known location, what equipment they had with them. The boys were 17 and 15, with moderate camping experience. They'd parked at the Devil's Backbone trailhead and planned to camp near Stillwater Creek, about 4 miles in. Probably just lost track of time, said Rollins, one of our newer team members. Teenagers, you know. Peterson, who was coordinating the search, shook his head. Their parents say they were always responsible about check-ins. Both had phones, but they're going straight to voicemail now. I remembered the incident from 2 weeks earlier, the voice in the ravine, and caught Peterson's eye. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Jack, you'll take point on this one. Take Rollins and the K9 unit. We headed out at first light the next morning. The weather was clear, unseasonably warm for early October. The dogs picked up a scent almost immediately, leading us along the main trail towards Stillwater Creek. Looks like they stuck to the path, Rollins commented as we hiked. That's good, right? Usually, I replied, scanning the forest floor. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. We found their campsite just before noon. The tent was still set up, 2 sleeping bags inside, along with their backpacks. A fire pit had been dug, the ashes cold. Their food was hanging from a tree branch in a bear bag, exactly as they should have done. But there was no sign of the boys. They did everything right. Rollins said, examining the site. Doesn't look like animal interference? The dogs were circling the perimeter of the camp, agitated but not picking up a clear trail. One of the handlers, Martinez, approached me with a frown. Something's wrong with their behavior, she said quietly. It's like they're catching scents going in multiple directions at once. I nodded, examining the ground more carefully. That's when I noticed it. Footprints leading away from the camp in 4 different directions. All of them appeared to be from the same 2 pairs of hiking boots. That's not possible, Rollins said when I pointed it out. How can the same 2 people walk in 4 different directions at once? Radio Peterson, I told him. Tell him we need more teams out here. While Rollins made the call, I followed one set of tracks with Martinez and her dog, Samson. The prints led straight toward a dense thicket about 50 yards from the camp. They were clear and deliberate, not the wandering pattern of someone who's lost. The track stopped abruptly at the edge of the thicket, not gradually fading out, not transitioning to a different type of ground cover, just suddenly ended, as if the person making them had vanished into thin air. Samson began whining, backing away from the spot where the tracks disappeared. His hackles were raised, ears flattened against his head. "I've never seen him act like this," Martinez whispered. Something scared him. I crouched down to examine the final footprints. That's when I noticed something odd embedded in the soil next to the last print, a small metallic object. I carefully extracted it with my knife. It was a key on a plastic keychain, the kind you'd use for a school locker. The name Josh was printed on the plastic. My radio crackled. "Jack, it's Peterson. We've got 3 more teams heading your way. Any sign of the boys?" I hesitated, looking at the key in my palm. "Found something that belongs to one of them. But the tracks, they're not making sense." By late afternoon, all 4 teams had followed the diverging trails from the campsite. Each path ended the same way, abrupt termination of the tracks, as if the boys had simply ceased to exist mid-step. At each terminus point, we found a small personal item. Josh's watch at one, Mitch's pocket knife at another, a glasses case at the third. The 4th trail, which headed due north, was different. These tracks didn't stop suddenly. They continued for nearly a mile before reaching Stillwater Creek. There, on the muddy bank, we found 2 pairs of footprints side by side, facing the water. Beside them were 2 more sets of prints, but these weren't from hiking boots. They were narrower, longer, with an unusual pointed shape to the toe, and they had emerged from the creek. "What makes tracks like these?" Rollins asked, his voice unsteady. I had no answer. In all my years of tracking, I'd never seen prints with that particular configuration. They weren't animal tracks, that much was certain. They were bipedal, approximately the size of an adult human foot, but the proportions were all wrong. Most disturbing of all, these strange tracks intermingled with the boys' prints. Then all 4 sets moved back toward the creek and disappeared at the water's edge. We searched until darkness forced us to retreat. The creek was dragged the next day, but nothing was found. No bodies, no additional evidence, just a gentle, shallow stream that gave up none of its secrets. On the 3rd day, as we were preparing to expand the search radius, Peterson received a call that left us all speechless. The Anderson boys had been found, not in Black River Forest, but in a neighboring county, 50 miles away. They were disoriented, dehydrated, with no memory of how they'd gotten there. According to the sheriff who found them walking along a rural highway, they claimed to have been camping, gone to sleep in their tent, and woken up in an unfamiliar forest with none of their gear. The search was called off. Officially, the case was classified as resolved, though that hardly seemed the right word for it. Later that evening, Peterson and I sat in his office reviewing the file. "This isn't the first time, is it?" I asked, thinking about the tracks that led nowhere, the strange prints by the creek. Peterson opened his desk drawer and removed a folder, older and thicker than the one we'd been reviewing. "Black River has a history," he said quietly. "Most of it doesn't make the official reports." He slid the folder across to me. Inside were dozens of case files dating back to the 1970s, missing persons found miles from their last known location, with no memory of the intervening time. Multiple reports of tracks that split in impossible ways or ended abruptly. strange prints found near water sources. Why keep this secret? I demanded. People should know what they're walking into out there. Peterson leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 56 years. What would we tell them, Jack? That something in these woods can make copies of your tracks? That it can lure you away from safety and dump you miles away with no memory of what happened? Who would believe that? He had a point. Without experiencing it firsthand, I wouldn't have believed it myself. There's something else, Peterson added, his voice dropping even lower. The boys' medical examination. The doctor found unusual marks on their ankles. 3 parallel lines, like puncture wounds, but with no entry point. Just surface marks, perfectly spaced. I thought of the strange tracks by the creek, the pointed toes. Like something had grabbed them. Peterson nodded. The marks will fade in a few days. By the time anyone else examines them, there'll be no evidence. I left Peterson's office with more questions than answers, and a growing unease about the forest I'd thought I knew so well. The folder he'd shown me, those cases spanning decades, suggested a pattern, a presence in Black River that had been operating undetected for years, or perhaps not undetected, but deliberately unacknowledged. That night, I spread my topographical maps of Black River across my kitchen table, marking the locations of every incident from Peterson's folder. A pattern began to emerge. Most occurrences were within 2 miles of a water source, with Stillwater Creek having the highest concentration. As I studied the pattern, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made my blood freeze. "You found my key. Bring it back to the creek." The message was signed, Josh. I immediately called the hospital where the Anderson boys had been taken. They confirmed both teenagers were still in their care, with no access to phones. I placed Josh's key on the map right at the point where his tracks had vanished, and stared at it for a long time. Something was reaching out from Black River Forest, something that could wear a person's identity like a costume, and now it wanted me to come back. There are unwritten rules in search and rescue, guidelines passed down from veteran to rookie, never formalized in any training manual, but understood to be critical for survival. I've been collecting these rules for years, listening to the old-timers, observing patterns in the incidents we never officially report. Rule 1. Never go alone into Black River after dark. Rule 2. If you hear someone calling your name, verify their identity visually before approaching. Rule 3. Respect the boundaries. Some parts of the forest are not meant to be entered. After receiving the text message signed Josh, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those strange tracks by Stillwater Creek, the key I'd found, and the folder of cases Peterson had shown me. There was a pattern here, a history of unexplained occurrences that the Forest Service had been quietly documenting for decades. I needed answers, but I also knew better than to rush back to the creek alone. Whatever had left those unusual footprints, whatever could create duplicate tracks leading in 4 directions simultaneously, it wasn't something to confront without preparation. The next morning, I sought out the oldest member of our team, a man named Garrett who'd been with Black River CR for nearly 30 years. He rarely spoke about his experiences, but if anyone knew the truth about what was happening, it would be him. I found him at the equipment shed, meticulously checking the supplies for our emergency packs. "Garrett, I need to ask you something," I said, closing the door behind me, "about Stillwater Creek." His hands paused over the first aid kit he'd been inventorying. "What about it?" "The Anderson case, the tracks that split off in different directions, the strange prints near the water." "I know it's not the first time." Garrett set down the kit and turned to face me. His weathered face revealed nothing but his eyes. They held a wariness I recognized. "Peterson showed you the folder," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Then you know we don't talk about these things, not officially." "I need to understand what's out there," I insisted. "I got a text last night from someone claiming to be Josh Anderson, asking me to bring his key back to the creek." Garrett's expression darkened. "And you're actually considering it? After what you saw?" He shook his head. "You're smarter than that, Jack." "I'm not going alone," I assured him. "But I can't just ignore this. Kids go missing in these woods, Garrett. Some never come back. If there's something out there targeting people, we have a responsibility to stop it. The older man was quiet for a long moment, seemingly weighing his options. Finally, he sighed and reached into his jacket pocket, removing a small leather-bound notebook. "There are rules," he said, handing me the notebook. "They've kept me alive for 30 years in Black River. Break them at your own risk." I opened the notebook, finding pages of handwritten notes, observations, and warnings compiled over decades of service. Some entries dated back to the 1960s, passed down from previous generations of SAR officers. The old-timers called it the collector, Garrett explained as I flipped through the pages. Whatever it is, it leaves copies of tracks to confuse searchers, takes personal items as souvenirs, I guess you could say, and it has an affinity for water. One entry caught my eye. Collector mimics voices, knows names it shouldn't, creates false trails, always returns to water, never follow it alone. "This thing has been operating in Black River for over 60 years, I asked, looking up from the notebook. Garrett nodded. "Probably longer. The earliest accounts I've heard date back to when this area was first being logged in the 1880s. Loggers would disappear, then turn up miles away with no memory of how they got there. Or not turn up at all. Why hasn't anyone done anything about it?" "What would you have us do?" Garrett asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "We can't exactly file reports about impossible footprints and entities that mimic human voices. We'd lose our jobs, and whoever replaced us wouldn't know the rules. More people would die." He had a point. The rational world had no framework for understanding what was happening in Black River. "So we just let it continue?" I pressed. Garrett's expression hardened. "We protect people the best way we know how. We find the ones who go missing. We teach the rules to those who need to know. And we stay the hell away from Stillwater Creek after dark." I looked down at the notebook again, turning to the last few pages. They contained a detailed map of Black River, with certain areas marked in red, places where incidents had occurred most frequently. Stillwater Creek was encircled multiple times, with a note beside it. "Highest activity. Possible origin point? I think it's getting more active," I told Garrett. "That text message, it's never reached out like that before, has it?" Garrett shook his head slowly. "Not that I know of. Technology changes things, gives it new ways to communicate, I suppose." "I need to go back there," I said. "Not alone, and not after dark, but I need to understand what we're dealing with." The older man studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Take Anderson with you. He's been here almost as long as I have. And take this." He removed something from his pocket, a small silver whistle on a chain. "Old silver. One of the rules, it doesn't like the sound of silver whistles, might buy you some time if things go wrong." I accepted the whistle, feeling its weight, heavier than it looked and cold to the touch. "Any other advice?" "Yeah," Garrett said grimly. "Don't bring that key back to the creek. Whatever's asking for it, it's not Josh Anderson." The following morning I met with Anderson at the ranger station. I'd brought Garrett's notebook, the silver whistle, and, against explicit advice, Josh's key. I didn't plan to hand it over to whatever had sent that text, but I thought it might help us understand what we were dealing with. Anderson was a stocky man in his early 50s, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and eyes that had seen too much. He listened silently as I explained what I wanted to do. "Garrett told me you'd be coming," he said when I'd finished. "Thought you might be ready to learn more about our friend at Stillwater." "Friend is a generous term," I replied. Anderson shrugged. "Know your enemy, respect its power. That's rule number 4, by the way." We drove to Devil's Backbone trailhead in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The day was overcast, a light drizzle dampening the forest floor and muting the sounds around us, conditions that would make tracking difficult under normal circumstances. "We're not going all the way to the creek," Anderson said as we started down the trail. "We observe from a distance. Understood?" I nodded, though part of me had already decided I would get closer if the opportunity presented itself. I needed to see this thing, to understand what we were up against. We hiked for 2 hours, following the same route I'd taken during the search for the Anderson boys. The forest felt different today, quieter, as if the wildlife was deliberately avoiding this area. No birdsong, no rustling in the underbrush, just the soft patter of rain on leaves and our own footsteps on the muddy trail. When we were about a quarter-mile from Stillwater Creek, Anderson signaled for us to leave the main path. We veered east, climbing a small ridge that would give us a vantage point overlooking the creek without getting too close. "There," Anderson whispered, pointing through the trees once we'd reached the top. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the gently flowing creek, swollen slightly from the rain, its surface dimpled with droplets. Then, I noticed the footprints along the bank, fresh ones that hadn't been there during our search. They appeared to be human, moving back and forth along the water's edge, as if pacing. "Is someone else out here?" I asked quietly. Anderson shook his head. "Watch." As we observed from our hidden position, the footprints continued to form, one after another, pressing into the mud along the creek bank, though there was no visible entity making them. It was as if an invisible person was walking there, leaving perfect impressions with each step. "What the hell?" I breathed, instinctively reaching for the silver whistle around my neck. "It's looking for something," Anderson murmured. "Or someone." The invisible walker continued its pacing for several minutes, then suddenly stopped. The final footprint faced in our direction, pointing toward our hiding place on the ridge. Without warning, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to find another text from the unknown number. "I see you, Jack. Did you bring my key?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Anderson saw my expression and grabbed my arm. "We need to go. Now." But before we could move, a new set of footprints began forming in the mud, heading away from the creek and toward the base of our ridge. Whatever this entity was, it was coming for us. "Run," Anderson hissed, pulling me to my feet. "Back to the main trail. Don't stop. Don't look back." We crashed through the underbrush, abandoning any pretense of stealth. Behind us, I could hear something moving through the forest. Not the sound of footsteps, but a strange rustling, like wet clothing dragging across leaves. My phone buzzed continuously in my pocket, but I didn't dare check it. We sprinted along the ridge, then descended toward the main trail, slipping on wet leaves and mud in our haste. As we reached the trail, Anderson stumbled, his foot catching on an exposed root. He went down hard, a sharp cry of pain escaping him as his ankle twisted at an unnatural angle. "Leave me," he gasped as I moved to help him. "Get back to the trailhead." "Not happening," I replied, pulling his arm over my shoulder and hauling him to his feet. "We go together." We hobbled forward as quickly as we could manage, Anderson wincing with each step. The strange rustling sound behind us grew louder, closer. In desperation, I pulled out the silver whistle and blew it hard. The sound that emerged wasn't what I expected, not the sharp, clear note of a normal whistle, but a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the very trees around us. The rustling behind us stopped abruptly. Taking advantage of the moment, I half-carried Anderson forward, pushing our pace despite his injury. We'd made it perhaps 50 yards when my phone buzzed one final time. Against my better judgment, I pulled it out while still moving. The message chilled me to the bone. "The key belongs to the creek now. You will too, soon enough." I looked down in horror to realize the key was no longer in my pocket. It must have fallen out during our frantic escape through the forest. We made it back to the trailhead without further incident, but the sense of being watched never left us. Anderson's ankle was badly sprained, requiring a trip to the urgent care clinic in town. While we waited for his examination, he fixed me with a grave look. "You understand now, don't you? Why we don't talk about these things?" I nodded slowly. "It's intelligent. It plans. It uses technology." "And it's patient," Anderson added. "It's been in these woods a lot longer than we have. It'll still be there long after we're gone." Later that night, as I sat at my kitchen table reviewing Garrett's notebook again, I realized something that made my skin crawl. When the Anderson boys had been found 50 miles away, they'd been discovered walking along a road that led to a tributary of the same watershed that fed Stillwater Creek. Whatever this entity was, this collector, as the old-timers called it, its reach extended beyond Black River Forest, following the water to other locations. I made my own entry in the notebook that night, adding to the accumulated wisdom of generations of SAR officers. Rule 27. It can follow the water. Nowhere connected to Black River's watershed is truly safe. As I wrote those words, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd drawn the attention of something ancient and patient, something that now knew my name, my face, and the sound of my footsteps in the forest. And somewhere in Black River, near a quietly flowing creek, it was waiting for me to return. The thing about working search and rescue is that every rescue has its own rhythm. Some are straightforward. A lost hiker who wandered off trail, a climber stranded by changing weather conditions. Others twist and turn like the forest paths themselves, leading you to places you never expected to go. The Jenkins case started simply enough. A family of 4 on a weekend camping trip. Robert and Louise Jenkins and their 2 children, Amy, 10, and Brendan, 8. They'd set up camp in the eastern sector of Black River, in a designated campground near Echo Lake. Standard stuff, a fire pit, a 4-person tent, all the usual camping gear. They were supposed to check out Sunday afternoon. When the campground host made his rounds Monday morning and found their site still occupied but no sign of the family, he called it in. Peterson assigned me as lead, with Martinez and Rollins as support. After my experience at Stillwater Creek 2 weeks earlier, I'd been half expecting to be taken off field duty, but Peterson had simply said, "You've seen what's out there now. That makes you more valuable, not less." We arrived at the Jenkins campsite around 9 a.m. Tuesday. Everything looked normal at first glance. Tent still properly staked down, cooking equipment neatly arranged on the picnic table, a cooler secured in the car to keep animals away. No signs of disturbance or struggle. "Looks like they just walked away," Rollins observed, peering into the tent. "Their sleeping bags are still laid out. Even their shoes are here." That detail made me pause. 4 pairs of hiking boots were neatly arranged at the tent entrance. If the family had left, they'd done so barefoot. Martinez's K9 partner, Samson, circled the perimeter of the campsite, nose to the ground. Unlike our experience with the Anderson boys, he didn't seem confused or agitated. He picked up a scent and headed purposefully toward the lakeshore, about 50 yards from the campsite. I felt a familiar unease settle in my stomach. Water again. "Careful," I warned as we followed the dog. "Stay together." Echo Lake was smaller than Stillwater Creek, but deeper, with clear water that reflected the surrounding pines like a mirror. As we approached the shore, Samson led us to a small wooden dock, extending about 20 feet into the water. The dog stopped at the end of the dock, whining softly. "He's saying they went into the water," Martinez explained, frowning. "All 4 of them." I studied the weathered planks of the dock, looking for any sign of struggle or accident. There was nothing. No scuff marks, no dropped items, no indication of anyone falling in. Just 4 sets of barefoot prints leading to the end of the dock and stopping. "Could they have gone swimming?" Rollins suggested. "Maybe got into trouble in the water?" I shook my head. "In October, water's too cold. And where are their towels, their swimwear? They left their shoes at the tent." We radioed for a dive team, which arrived 2 hours later. They searched the lake thoroughly, focusing on the area around the dock. They found nothing, no bodies, no personal items, no evidence that anyone had entered the water recently. By late afternoon, we'd expanded our search to the trail surrounding Echo Lake. Still nothing. It was as if the Jenkins family had simply ceased to exist at the end of that dock. As twilight approached, Peterson called to order us back to base. "We'll resume at first light," he said over the radio. "No one stays in the field after dark." Rule 1. Never go alone into Black River after dark. Back at the ranger station, I reviewed our findings with Peterson. He seemed particularly interested in the barefoot prints leading to the dock. "No signs of coercion? No drag marks or indications they were forced?" he asked. "None. They walked to the dock of their own accord, all 4 of them." Peterson nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Reminds me of the Haskins case in '97. Family of 3 vanished from the north shore of Echo Lake. Barefoot, just like this." "What happened to them?" I asked. "They turned up 3 days later in a field 30 miles east of here. Disoriented, dehydrated, feet cut up from walking without shoes. No memory of what happened after they went to sleep in their tent." I thought of the Anderson boys, found in similar condition miles from where they'd disappeared. The collector again? Peterson shrugged. Different body of water, but same pattern. The older reports call it the Echo Lake amnesia. People go missing, then reappear days later with no memory of the intervening time. Why hasn't the lake been closed to the public? I demanded. If this has happened before, officially, the Haskins case was attributed to carbon monoxide poisoning from their camp stove, causing confusion and wandering, Peterson interrupted. Just like the Anderson boys were officially listed as disoriented hikers who lost their way. We document the patterns, Jack, but we don't control the official narrative. I left the ranger station that night with a familiar frustration gnawing at me. More questions, fewer answers, and the knowledge that we were deliberately keeping the public in the dark about the dangers lurking in Black River. The search resumed at dawn the next day, with additional teams joining us to cover more ground. By noon, we'd found nothing new. No trail, no sign of where the Jenkins family might have gone after apparently walking off the end of the dock. I was taking a short break, sitting on a fallen log near the lake shore when my radio crackled. Base to all units. Be advised, we just received a call from Highway Patrol. A family matching the Jenkins description has been found walking along Route 16, approximately 20 miles northeast of Echo Lake. Proceed to extraction point for transport. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by apprehension. Found alive, but in what condition? And with what memories of the past 2 days? I joined Martinez and Rollins in the SAR vehicle, and we sped to the location where Highway Patrol had picked up the Jenkins family. The scene was eerily similar to what I'd heard about the Anderson boys. The family was disoriented, dehydrated, their feet cut and bruised from walking barefoot. Most disturbing of all was their collective amnesia. None of them had any recollection of leaving their campsite or how they'd traveled 20 miles through dense forest without shoes or supplies. We were roasting marshmallows, Robert Jenkins told me when I interviewed him at the hospital later that day. The kids were excited because it was their first camping trip. We all went to sleep in the tent. Then I woke up walking along that highway, holding Amy's hand. Louise had Brendan. We were all just walking. You don't remember anything about the past 2 days? I pressed gently. Anything at all? He shook his head, frustrated tears welling in his eyes. It was like falling asleep and waking up somewhere else. No dreams, no sense of time passing. Nothing. The medical examination revealed no drugs in their systems, no signs of physical assault beyond the cuts and bruises on their feet. The only unusual finding, one that made my skin crawl when I read the report, was a series of 3 parallel marks around each of their ankles, the same marks that had been found on the Anderson boys. That evening I called Anderson, who was still on medical leave with his sprained ankle. The Jenkins family had those same marks, I told him after explaining the situation. 3 parallel lines around their ankles. Like something grabbed them and dragged them, Anderson said grimly. Pulled them into the water, maybe. But there were no signs of struggle. They walked to the dock voluntarily, barefoot. Sleepwalking? Anderson suggested. Some kind of hypnotic suggestion? I didn't have an answer. The pattern was becoming clearer, but the mechanism remained obscure. People disappeared near bodies of water in Black River, then reappeared miles away with no memory of the intervening time and those strange marks on their ankles. There's something else, I added. When I was interviewing the Jenkins girl, Amy, she said something odd. She said she remembered the singing under the water. When I asked her to explain, she just repeated that phrase, the singing under the water, then started crying. Her parents didn't want me to question her further. Anderson was quiet for a moment. Check Garrett's notebook, he finally said. Page 17. There's an account from 1986, a child who went missing near Stillwater Creek and was found 3 days later. He mentioned hearing singing under the water. That night I pored over Garrett's notebook again, focusing on the accounts of those who had returned from their unexplained absences. Most remembered nothing, but a few, particularly children, reported fragmentary memories, singing beneath the water, walking through tunnels that shouldn't exist, the feeling of being watched by many eyes at once. On an impulse, I pulled out my topographical map of Black River and traced the water systems. Echo Lake drained into a creek that eventually joined with Stillwater Creek, which in turn fed into the Black River itself. All connected, all part of the same watershed. Rule 27. It can follow the water. Nowhere connected to Black River's watershed is truly safe. The next day, I requested access to the historical archives kept at the ranger station. Peterson raised an eyebrow but gave me the key without comment. The archives were housed in a small, climate-controlled room at the back of the building. Decades of reports, photographs, and journals documenting the history of Black River National Forest. I focused my search on incidents involving Echo Lake, working backward chronologically. The Haskins case from 1997 was there, officially attributed to carbon monoxide poisoning, as Peterson had said. Before that, a pair of hikers in 1989 found wandering 25 miles from their last known location with no memory of how they got there. 3 college students in 1978 disappeared from a lakeside campsite, reappeared 4 days later, a family in 1963, 2 park rangers in 1952. The pattern stretched back decades, all with the same elements: disappearances near water, reappearances miles away, missing memories, and those who retained fragments mentioning singing under the water, or eyes watching from below. The oldest record I found dated to 1937, when Black River was first designated as a national forest. A surveyor named William Hancock vanished while mapping the area around Echo Lake. In his journal, recovered from his campsite, the final entry read, "The locals warn against camping near the water at night. They say something old lives in these connected waterways, something that came long before the settlers. The native tribes called it the Taker of Mines." I believe these are simply superstitions meant to keep outsiders away from prime hunting grounds, but I will admit the lake has an eerie quality after sunset. The way sound carries across the water, almost like voices singing, can play tricks on one's mind. Hancock was found 2 weeks later, wandering in a field nearly 40 miles away. According to the report, he had no recollection of the intervening time and was described as changed in temperament, prone to staring at standing water for hours at a time. I was so engrossed in my research that I didn't notice Peterson standing in the doorway until he spoke. "Finding what you're looking for?" he asked quietly. I looked up, startled. "This has been happening for at least 90 years, probably longer." Peterson nodded. "And we've been keeping records, passing down the rules, trying to minimize the damage. That's our job, Jack." "Our job is to protect people," I countered. "How can we do that if we're hiding the truth?" "And what truth would you have us tell?" Peterson's voice was tired but firm. "That there's something in the water that can lure you away, make you forget days of your life? That it leaves marks on you that vanish within a week, leaving no evidence? Who would believe that?" He had a point, but it didn't ease my frustration. "So we just accept that people will keep disappearing? That some won't come back at all?" Peterson sighed heavily. "We do what we can. We find the ones who return. We teach the rules to those who need to know them, and we hope that's enough." But it wasn't enough. Not for me. The Jenkins family had been lucky. All 4 had returned alive. But the archived reports showed that wasn't always the case. Some disappeared and were never found. Others returned changed, like Hancock, with a strange affinity for water and a tendency to wander back toward the forest if not watched carefully. That night, I made a decision that would ultimately change everything I thought I knew about Black River and the entity that haunted its waters. I was going back to Echo Lake, alone, after dark. Breaking Rule 1 was not something I did lightly. I knew the risks, had seen firsthand what lurked in Black River's waters. But I was tired of finding people after they'd been taken, tired of documenting patterns without understanding the cause. I arrived at Echo Lake just after midnight, parking my personal vehicle at a service road half a mile from the Jenkins campsite. The night was clear and cold, the moon nearly full, casting silver light across the landscape. I moved silently through the forest, using only my red-filtered headlamp when absolutely necessary to preserve my night vision. The lake was eerily still when I reached it, a perfect mirror reflecting the star-filled sky. The wooden dock where the Jenkins family had disappeared extended into the dark water like a finger pointing to the center of the lake. I sat concealed among the trees at the shore, watching, listening. For the first hour, nothing happened. The normal sounds of the forest at night, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small nocturnal animals in the underbrush, created a deceptively peaceful atmosphere. Then, as the moon reached its zenith, I heard it, a faint sound coming from beneath the surface of the lake, not quite singing, not quite speech, but something in between. A rhythmic, melodic vibration that seemed to resonate in my chest rather than my ears. I found myself standing, moving toward the dock without conscious decision. It was as if the sound was pulling me forward, drawing me toward the water. With tremendous effort, I forced myself to stop, to break the compulsion. That's when I saw them, ripples spreading across the previously still surface of the lake, moving toward the shore, toward me. I retreated deeper into the cover of the trees, watching as the ripples reached the dock. Something breached the surface there, just for a moment. Too quick to see clearly in the moonlight, but I caught an impression of elongated fingers, pale and glistening, gripping the edge of the dock before sliding back beneath the water. The singing grew louder, more insistent. I felt a pressure building in my head, a compelling urge to walk forward, to step onto the dock, to approach the water. With shaking hands, I pulled out Garrett's silver whistle and blew it. The deep, resonant tone cut through the night air, and immediately the singing stopped. The ripples on the lake subsided, the surface becoming unnaturally still once more. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, the whistle still clutched in my hand. Minutes passed in absolute silence. Not even the ambient forest sounds remained. It was as if the entire woodland was holding its breath. Then, without warning, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to find a text message from an unknown number. "Why do you resist? The water wants to show you its secrets." I backed away from the shore, still facing the lake, the whistle ready in my hand. Another text arrived. "You cannot stop what has always been, Jack Harmon. The water connects all things. It reaches everywhere." As I retreated through the forest toward my vehicle, a final message appeared on my screen. "We will meet again. In time, you will come to the water willingly." I drove home in a state of numb shock, my mind struggling to process what I'd witnessed. The entity in Black River's waters wasn't just mimicking voices or creating false trails. It was actively communicating, luring people to the water with that strange, compelling song, and now using technology to extend its reach. Back at my cabin, I documented everything in detail, adding to Garrett's notebook. As I wrote, a disturbing thought occurred to me. I'd experienced the entity's song, felt its pull. If I hadn't had the silver whistle, would I have ended up like the Jenkins family, walking barefoot into the lake, only to reappear days later with no memory and those strange marks around my ankles? Or would I have been one of those who never returned at all? The question haunted me as I finally collapsed into bed, exhausted but too wired to sleep. In the darkness of my bedroom, I could still hear the faint echo of that underwater singing, a phantom memory that seemed to vibrate in my bones. And as I drifted toward uneasy sleep, a final chilling thought crossed my mind. The water from my tap, the water in my shower, even the rain that fell on my roof. It all eventually flowed to the same watershed, all connected to Black River and its lakes and streams. The entity had said it through that text message. The water connects all things. It reaches everywhere. Nowhere was truly safe. There's an old saying among SAR veterans, the forest gives up its dead sooner or later. It's meant to be reassuring, a reminder that missing persons are usually found whether alive or otherwise. But in Black River, some people stay missing. Their names become whispered warnings, their disappearances unexplained gaps in our records. Jason Collins was one such name. A geology graduate student from the state university, he'd come to Black River 3 years ago to study the unusual rock formations in the northern sector. His research focused on what he called hydrological anomalies, places where water behaved in ways that defied standard geological principles. Collins vanished during a solo expedition near Deadman's Gorge, a deep ravine where several underground streams converged. His equipment was found precisely arranged beside a pool at the bottom of the gorge, sample collection tools, notebooks, camera. But of Collins himself, there was no trace. The case had gone cold long before I joined Black River SR, but his name came up occasionally in conversations among the veterans. Always in that same hushed tone, always followed by significant glances and changed subjects. After my encounter at Echo Lake, I found myself drawn to Collins' case. His research on water anomalies seemed too coincidental given what I now knew about Black River's waterways and the entity that inhabited them. I approached Peterson with a request to review the Collins file. He was unusually hesitant, citing administrative barriers and classified information. This only increased my suspicion that the case held important clues. I need to know what happened to him, I insisted. His research might help us understand what we're dealing with. Peterson studied me for a long moment, then sighed. Collins wasn't just studying the water, he said quietly. He knew something was in it. His last field report mentioned bioacoustic signatures unlike any known species. He believed there was an undiscovered organism living in Black River's watershed. Was he right? I pressed. His equipment was found running when the search team located his site. His hydrophone had been recording for 18 hours straight. Peterson's expression darkened. The audio file was disturbing. The same singing you described hearing at Echo Lake, but clearer, more complex. Multiple voices, layered over each other. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I want to hear it. No, Peterson said firmly. That recording is secured for good reason. 3 of the SAR officers who first heard it walked into the pool where Collins disappeared. We barely got them out in time. This revelation stunned me. Not just the entity's power to compel action through sound, but the fact that it had nearly claimed more victims from among our own ranks. What happened to them? The officers who were affected? Mandatory transfer to other forests. Standard procedure for anyone who shows susceptibility. Peterson's gaze was steady. Like I told you before, we do what we can to protect people, Jack. Sometimes that means keeping them away from things they don't need to know. But I did need to know. The entity was escalating its activities. The Anderson boys, the Jenkins family, the texts to my phone, and now this revelation about Collins and the affected SAR officers. Patterns were emerging that suggested something more organized than random opportunistic predation. I spent the next few days combing through every report I could access related to water bodies in Black River. A picture began to form. Disappearances clustered not just around Echo Lake and Stillwater Creek, but along the entire watershed, with the highest concentration in areas where water flowed underground before resurfacing. Collins had been studying one such location. Dead Man's Gorge was known for its extensive cave system beneath the ravine floor, through which several streams flowed before joining to form the pool where he'd vanished. I needed to see it for myself. This time, I didn't go alone. I approached Martinez, whose experience with search dogs made her uniquely valuable, and whose analytical mind I trusted. After hearing what I'd learned, she agreed to accompany me to the gorge. We went on our day off, presenting it as a training exercise for Samson. The November air was crisp and cold as we hiked the steep trail down into the gorge, fallen leaves crunching beneath our boots. Peterson will have your badge if he finds out about this, Martinez commented as we descended. Only if we make it back to tell him, I replied, only half joking. Dead Man's Gorge lived up to its ominous name. Sheer rock walls rose on either side, blocking much of the daylight and creating a perpetual twilight at the bottom. The air was damp and cold, carrying the mineral smell of wet stone and the constant sound of flowing water. We located the pool where Collins had disappeared easily enough. It was marked on our topographical map, a roughly circular body of water about 30 feet across. The surface was glassy and still despite the streams that fed it, creating an unnatural mirror effect. No outflow channel, Martinez observed, frowning. Where does the water go? It was a good question. The pool should have been overflowing given the streams feeding into it, yet the water level remained constant. Collins thought there might be an underwater cave system, I explained, a subterranean river that carries the water deeper underground. Samson was unusually agitated, circling the pool but refusing to approach the water's edge. His behavior reminded me of how he'd acted at Stillwater Creek during the Anderson search. He senses something, Martinez said quietly. Something he doesn't like. We set up our equipment at a safe distance from the water, temperature and humidity sensors, a small hydrophone similar to what Collins had used, and a camera to document anything unusual. The hydrophone readings came through to Martinez's tablet immediately, showing sound waves that didn't match any known underwater source. Not animal, not mechanical, not the natural flow of water over rock. This doesn't make sense, she muttered, adjusting the settings. It's like speech patterns, but no known language. I remembered the singing I'd heard at Echo Lake, the rhythmic, melodic vibration that had seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my chest. "Can you play it through the speaker?" Martinez hesitated. "After what you told me about the recording affecting those other officers, is that wise?" She had a point. "Lower the volume, keep it brief. We need to confirm if it's the same phenomenon." With reluctance, she activated the external speaker at the lowest setting. The sound that emerged was faint but unmistakable. The same underwater singing I'd heard at Echo Lake, but with greater clarity and complexity. Multiple tones overlapping, creating harmonies that shouldn't have been possible in water. Samson began whining, backing away from the pool with his tail between his legs. The sound was affecting him too. "That's enough," I said after a few seconds, and Martinez shut it off immediately. "That was—" She paused, searching for words. "Structured, intentional, not random noise." I nodded, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the gorgeous cold air. "It's communication." We continued our investigation, careful to maintain distance from the water's edge. The temperature readings were another anomaly. The pool was significantly warmer than the streams feeding it, suggesting a heat source from below. As we worked, I noticed something on the rock wall nearest the pool, faint markings etched into the stone. Moving closer, I realized they were petroglyphs, ancient images carved by human hands long before Black River was designated a national forest. The carvings depicted elongated humanoid figures surrounding a circular shape that could have represented the pool. The figures had disproportionately long arms and what appeared to be gills on their necks. Below them were wavy lines representing water and smaller human figures being pulled beneath the surface. "Native American?" Martinez asked, examining the petroglyphs. "Maybe. The tribes that lived in this region believed water bodies were portals to the spirit world. They had legends about entities that lived beneath the surface and could lure humans underwater." As we documented the carvings, Samson suddenly began barking furiously, facing the pool with his hackles raised. We turned to see ripples spreading across the previously still surface, moving toward the shore where we stood. "Time to go," I said urgently, gathering our equipment. We retreated up the trail, Samson leading the way, clearly eager to put distance between himself and the pool. As we climbed, I glanced back to see something breach the surface momentarily. A pale, elongated hand reaching upward before slipping back beneath the water. When we reached the top of the gorge, Martinez stopped and turned to me, her expression troubled. "That wasn't natural, Jack. Whatever's down there, it responded to us. To our presence, our equipment, maybe even our conversation." "I know," I replied, still processing what we'd witnessed. "The question is, what do we do with this information?" The answer came sooner than expected. As we hiked back toward the trailhead, both our phones signaled incoming messages simultaneously. Mine read, "The deep remembers you, Jack Harmon. It has known your family for generations." Martinez's face paled as she showed me her screen. "Your dog senses what you cannot, Elena Martinez. He knows to fear the water." The entity knew our names. It knew Martinez had a dog with her, and most disturbingly, it claimed some connection to my family that spanned generations. Back at the ranger station, we downloaded the data from our equipment for analysis. The hydrophone recordings revealed something we hadn't noticed in real time. The underwater sounds had changed after we played them through the speaker. It was as if the entity had responded to hearing its own voice, adjusting its communication patterns accordingly. "It's learning," Martinez said quietly as we reviewed the audio waveforms, "adapting to our technology." I nodded, thinking of the text messages, the way the entity had evolved from creating false trails and mimicking voices to active technological communication. "We need to tell Peterson." Peterson's reaction to our unauthorized expedition was surprisingly muted. Instead of the reprimand I'd expected, he listened intently to our findings, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound journal similar to Garrett's. "The petroglyphs confirm what we've suspected," he said when we'd finished our report. "This thing has been here since before European settlement. The native tribes knew about it, feared it." "What did it mean about my family?" I asked. "That message claiming it has known my family for generations?" Peterson closed his journal slowly. "Your grandfather worked for Black River SAR, didn't he?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes, but..." How did you know that? Because I worked with him, Jack. Edward Harmon was one of the best trackers we ever had. He was also one of the first to document the entity's patterns systematically. This revelation stunned me. My grandfather had died when I was 12, and while I knew he'd worked for the Forest Service, I'd never connected his role to what I was now experiencing. He never talked about anything like this, I said, trying to reconcile this new information with my memories. He wouldn't have, Peterson replied. We didn't burden our families with this knowledge then, just as we don't now. But Edward had theories about the entity. He believed it recognized certain bloodlines, could track them across generations. Why? Martinez asked. What would be the purpose? Peterson shrugged. Who can know the motivations of something so alien to our understanding? But Edward documented cases where multiple members of the same family went missing in Black River across different time periods, as if the entity was collecting them. The word sent a chill through me. The collector. That's what Garrett had called it in his notebook. There's more, Peterson continued, opening a drawer in his desk and removing a yellowed envelope. After your grandfather died, this was found among his personal effects. It was addressed to you, to be delivered when you were old enough. Your grandmother gave it to me for safekeeping when you joined Black River SAR. He handed me the envelope. My name was written on it in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting, the ink faded with age. I'll leave you to read it privately, Peterson said, standing. But Jack, whatever it contains, remember the rules. They've kept us alive this long. After Peterson and Martinez left, I sat alone in the office, staring at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting neat but hurried, as if written in haste. To my grandson Jack, if you're reading this, you've joined the Forest Service at Black River, and you've encountered what we call the collector. I had hoped this legacy would not pass to you, but some bloodlines are marked by the water, and ours is one of them. Your great-great-grandfather, Henry Harmon, was one of the original surveyors of Black River in 1902. He disappeared near Stillwater Creek for 7 days, then returned with no memory of where he'd been. Every generation of our family since has been drawn to these woods, to the water. Some return, some don't. I've spent my life studying the entity that lives in Black River's waterways. It's ancient, intelligent, and patient. It communicates through sound and can influence minds, especially those whose ancestors it has touched before. Our family is particularly susceptible. There are ways to resist its call. Silver disrupts its influence. Carry silver objects, especially those that create sound. Moving water weakens it. Still pools and lakes are where its power is strongest. And most importantly, never touch the water where it dwells. The touch creates a connection that never fully breaks. I don't know what it wants, why it takes people, why some return changed and others never come back at all. But I know it remembers our family, and it will call to you as it called to me. Stay safe, Jack. Stay away from the water. With love and concern, your grandfather, Edward. I sat in stunned silence, reading and rereading the letter. My family's connection to Black River and its mysterious entity went back over 100 years. This explained the text message. The deep remembers you. It has known your family for generations. It also explained the inexplicable pull I'd felt toward this place, why I'd chosen Black River specifically when applying to the Forest Service, despite opportunities elsewhere. Something had drawn me here, just as it had drawn my grandfather and his father before him. That night I added my grandfather's letter to Garrett's notebook, creating a more complete record of what we knew about the entity. The pieces were starting to fit together. A creature that lived in Black River's waterways, that could influence minds through sound, that remembered bloodlines across generations, that collected people and sometimes returned them changed. But the central question remained unanswered. What did it want? Why did it take people? And what happened to those who never returned? As I closed the notebook, my phone buzzed with a new message from the unknown number. You have your grandfather's curiosity, Jack Harmon. He too sought answers in the deep. Would you like to see where he went that final day? A chill ran through me. According to the official record, my grandfather had died of a heart attack while on a routine patrol. But this message implied something else entirely, that the entity had taken him, that he was one of those who never returned. Instead of responding to the text, I turned off my phone and placed it in a drawer. The entity was trying to lure me, using my family connection and my need for answers as bait. I needed to be smarter than that. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. What if my grandfather was still out there, somewhere beneath Black River's waters? What if all those who had never returned were still alive, in some form, in some place we couldn't reach or understand? The thought was both horrifying and compelling, a perfect lure for someone like me who had dedicated his life to finding the missing. They say knowledge is power, but in Black River, it's also a burden. The more I learned about the entity in the water, the more questions emerged, spreading like ripples from a stone dropped into a still pond. After discovering my family's connection to the collector, I became obsessed with finding patterns, understanding its nature and purpose. I spent hours poring over historical records, cross-referencing disappearances with water locations, mapping the underground streams and aquifers that connected seemingly isolated bodies of water throughout the forest. I was careful to follow the rules, never going near water bodies alone, carrying silver objects. I'd begun wearing my grandfather's old silver pocket watch, documenting everything I learned in Garrett's notebook. But the entity was growing more active, more aggressive in its communications. The texts to my phone continued, always from untraceable numbers that changed with each message. The deep grows impatient, Jack Harmon. Others have accepted our invitation. Why do you resist? Your grandfather understood in the end. He came willingly. I ignored them all, focusing instead on my research. The breakthrough came when I discovered a reference in the archives to audio recordings made throughout Black River in the 1970s, a sound survey conducted by the university's Environmental Science Department. The recordings had been made at various locations to document natural ambient sounds for ecological studies. What caught my attention was a notation in the margin of the survey report. Anomalous audio patterns detected at water locations. Recordings quarantined by Forest Service directive. Peterson was reluctant when I asked about these recordings, but finally admitted they existed, stored in a secured archive at the regional office. They're classified, Jack. Access is restricted for good reason. I need to hear them, I insisted. They might help us understand what we're dealing with. You've already heard the entity's voice, Peterson countered. You know how it affects people. Those recordings are too dangerous. I'm already connected to it, I argued. My family has been for generations. If anyone can listen safely, it's me. Peterson studied me for a long moment, then sighed. I'll make some calls, but this stays between us. And you listen under controlled conditions, with me present, at limited volume, for limited duration. 2 days later, we sat in a soundproofed room at the regional office. The recordings had been transferred to modern digital format, but remained otherwise unaltered. Each was labeled with a location and date. We'll start with Stillwater Creek, 1974, Peterson said, adjusting the equipment. Volume at minimum. Duration 30 seconds. Ready? I nodded, bracing myself for what I might hear. The recording began with normal forest sounds, bird calls, wind in trees, the gentle babble of flowing water. Then, almost at the threshold of hearing, another sound emerged from beneath the stream's natural rhythm. A melodic pattern, structured and deliberate, rising and falling in a way that reminded me of human speech, but was fundamentally alien. As I listened, I felt a familiar pull, the same compulsion I'd experienced at Echo Lake, urging me toward water. But something was different this time. Instead of a generalized call, I heard specificity, as if the sound was somehow addressing me personally, despite being recorded decades before my birth. Enough, Peterson said, stopping the playback after precisely 30 seconds. What did you notice? It recognized me, I said, struggling to articulate what I'd felt. The recording, it's decades old, but the entity somehow knew I would be listening. It addressed me specifically. Peterson didn't seem surprised. Time doesn't seem to mean the same thing to it. The recordings have this effect on anyone connected to the entity. They feel personally addressed, specifically called. We proceeded through more recordings from different water locations throughout Black River. Each had the same underlying pattern, that strange melodic communication beneath the natural water sounds. But there were variations, subtleties that suggested different voices, or perhaps different messages. The final recording was from Dead Man's Gorge, 1975. As it played, I noticed a distinct difference. The underwater sounds were more complex, layered, almost like multiple entities speaking simultaneously. And beneath it all, barely perceptible, was what sounded like a human voice responding. "Stop," I said urgently. "Go back. There's someone answering." Peterson rewound the recording, increasing the volume slightly and applying filters to isolate the human voice. When he played it again, we could hear it clearly, a man's voice speaking in what sounded like normal English, but the words were distorted, unintelligible. "Who is that?" I asked. "Someone from the survey team?" Peterson shook his head slowly. The survey team reported no verbal communication during their recording sessions. This voice shouldn't be here. We enhanced the audio further, cleaning up the distortion as much as possible. The voice gradually became clearer, though still strangely modulated, as if speaking through water. "Accept your invitation. Show me what's beneath. Family has always known." A chill ran down my spine. The phrasing was eerily similar to the text messages I'd been receiving. "Is there any way to identify the speaker?" I asked. Peterson was already checking the metadata associated with the recording. Date is August 17, 1975. Location Dead Man's Gorge, specifically the main pool at the bottom of the ravine. He paused, frowning. "Wait, that can't be right." "What?" "According to the log, this recording was made by a two-person team from the university. But there's a note here from the Forest Service liaison who accompanied them. It says a third person was present at the site, not part of the official team." "Who?" Peterson looked up from the screen, his expression grave. "Edward Harmon, your grandfather." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My grandfather had been there, at Dead Man's Gorge, communicating with the entity. His voice captured on tape, speaking phrases that echoed the messages now being sent to my phone nearly 50 years later. "He was studying it," I said, trying to make sense of this new information. "In his letter, he said he'd spent his life researching the entity." "There's more," Peterson said quietly. "Edward disappeared 3 days after this recording was made. He was found a week later, walking along Highway 16, the same road where we found the Jenkins family. He had no memory of where he'd been or what had happened to him. But his letter said he knew ways to resist its call. Silver objects moving water." "Maybe he did resist for a time," Peterson replied. "But eventually, the entity got to him. Just like it's trying to get to you now." We spent the next hour analyzing the remaining recordings, looking for patterns, trying to decipher the entity's communication. The more we listened, the more convinced I became that what we were hearing was not random sound, but a sophisticated language, one that operated on principles fundamentally different from human speech. "It communicates through frequency patterns, not just words," I observed. "The emotion, the intent, is carried in the harmonics." Peterson nodded. "And it adapts to the listener. These recordings affect different people in different ways. Those with a connection to the entity, like you, like your grandfather, hear something more personal than others do." As we prepared to leave, Peterson handed me a secure thumb drive. "I've copied all the recordings for you. Study them if you must, but be careful. Don't listen for too long at once, and never near water. The entity can sense when its voice is being played, even through a recording." I took the drive, understanding the trust Peterson was placing in me. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he replied grimly. "Knowledge isn't always a blessing, Jack. Sometimes it's just a more sophisticated form of bait." That night, in the safety of my cabin, I listened to the recordings again, focusing on the one from Dead Man's Gorge where my grandfather's voice had been captured. With better equipment and more time, I was able to clean up the audio further, revealing more of what he had said. "I accept your invitation to communicate. If you can show me what's beneath, I'll listen. My family has always known there was something in these waters. I want to understand." The entity's response was still largely unintelligible to my ears, but I could detect patterns now, rhythms and tonal shifts that suggested meaning. My grandfather had been attempting direct communication with the collector, trying to understand its nature and purpose. And now it was reaching out to me, using the same patterns, the same phrases. The continuation of a conversation started half a century ago. On impulse, I retrieved my grandfather's letter from Garrett's notebook and reread it, looking for clues I might have missed. One line jumped out at me now. I don't know what it wants, why it takes people, why some return changed and others never come back at all. He'd written this years after the recording at Dead Man's Gorge. Despite his direct communication with the entity, he still hadn't found the answers he sought. Or perhaps he had discovered something so disturbing that he couldn't bring himself to include it in the letter. I pulled out my maps of Black River again, focusing on the underground waterways that connected the various bodies of water where incidents had occurred. Stillwater Creek, Echo Lake, Dead Man's Gorge, all part of the same watershed, all connected beneath the surface. But there was one location I hadn't yet investigated, a place marked on the oldest maps as the Confluence, where all the underground streams of Black River reportedly joined before flowing into the main river. According to the geological surveys, the confluence was located in a deep cavern beneath Devil's Backbone Ridge, accessible only through a narrow fissure in the rock face. It wasn't part of any established trail, and the more recent Forest Service maps didn't even mark it, but it appeared in my grandfather's notes with a single warning scrawled beside it: "The source, do not approach." I had found my next destination. Knowing the risks of going alone, I approached Martinez the following day. Her experience with the entity at Dead Man's Gorge had convinced her of the seriousness of the situation, and her analytical mind made her the perfect partner for what I was planning. "The confluence," she repeated when I explained my theory. "I've never heard of it." "It's not on the current maps," I said, showing her the older geological survey, "but it's where all the underground waterways meet. If the entity has a central location, a place where its influence is strongest, this would be it." Martinez studied the map with a frown. "That's deep in the restricted zone. We'd need special clearance to enter that area." She was right. The entire northern section of Devil's Backbone was designated as restricted, officially due to unstable terrain and risk of landslides, but I was beginning to suspect other reasons. "Peterson won't authorize this," I admitted. "We'd have to go unofficially." Martinez gave me a long look. "You're talking about breaking multiple regulations, potentially risking our jobs. And that's assuming the entity doesn't get to us first." "I need answers, Elena," I said quietly. "Not just about what this thing is, but why it's connected to my family, why it took my grandfather, what he found down there." She was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Sunday. Peterson will be at the regional meeting. We can access the Northern Trail Maintenance Road with my credentials, get within a mile of the fissure location." "You're sure about this?" I asked, relieved but concerned for her safety. "No," she replied honestly, "but neither are you, and you're still going. Better two of us than you alone." We spent the next 2 days preparing, gathering equipment, climbing gear for the narrow fissure, underwater cameras to document the confluence, silver objects for protection. Martinez borrowed an antique silver compass from her father, and emergency locator beacons in case something went wrong. I also prepared a secure package of everything we'd learned about the entity, addressed to Peterson with instructions to open it if we didn't return. Knowledge that might be lost otherwise. The morning of our expedition dawned clear and cold. We met at the maintenance gate before sunrise, using Martinez's access card to enter the restricted zone. The drive up the service road was tense, both of us aware of the risks we were taking but committed to finding answers. We parked at the road's end and continued on foot, following the ridgeline of Devil's Backbone toward the coordinates where the fissure was marked on the old survey maps. The terrain was rugged, the forest thicker and older here than in the public areas of Black River. "No one comes here," Martinez observed as we hiked. "Look at the undergrowth, undisturbed for years." She was right. The forest floor showed no signs of human traffic, not even the faint game trails that typically crisscross the woods. It was as if all living creatures avoided this part of Black River. We found the fissure shortly before noon, a narrow crack in a rock face, partially hidden by vegetation, just as the old maps had indicated. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, descending at a steep angle into darkness. "Last chance to turn back," I said, as we prepared our climbing gear and headlamps. Martinez checked her silver compass, then nodded resolutely. "Let's find your answers." I led the way into the fissure, the beam of my headlamp illuminating rough stone walls that glistened with moisture. The passage descended steeply for about 50 feet before opening into a larger cavern. The sound of running water echoed from below, streams converging somewhere in the darkness. We rappelled down carefully, our headlamps creating dancing shadows on the wet rock. The air grew increasingly damp and cold as we descended, carrying that distinctive mineral smell I'd noticed at Deadman's Gorge, but stronger here, more concentrated. After about 20 minutes of careful climbing, we reached the bottom of the cavern. Our headlamps revealed a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness above us, and at its center, just as the old maps had indicated, the confluence. Multiple streams flowed from different tunnels in the cavern walls, all converging into a large, perfectly circular pool about 40 feet across. Unlike the rushing streams that fed it, the pool's surface was unnaturally still, reflecting our headlamps like a black mirror. "No outflow channel," Martinez whispered, echoing her observation from Deadman's Gorge. "Where does all this water go?" I approached the edge cautiously, keeping well back from the water. The pool seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Our headlamps barely penetrated its surface. "Look," Martinez said suddenly, pointing to the cavern wall nearest the pool. Our lights revealed what she had spotted. Petroglyphs, similar to those we'd seen at Deadman's Gorge but more extensive, covering the entire rock face. They depicted the same elongated figures with gill-like features, but here they were shown emerging from the circular pool, leading smaller human figures down into the water. "They're not taking them," I realized, studying the images. "They're guiding them, willingly." As we documented the petroglyphs, I noticed something carved into the stone floor near the pool's edge, newer than the ancient images, cut with modern tools. Moving closer, I saw it was a name and date. Edward Harmon, August 20th, 1975. My grandfather had been here 3 days after the recording at Deadman's Gorge, on the day he disappeared for a week. Before I could process this discovery, something changed in the cavern. The still surface of the pool began to ripple, concentric circles spreading outward from the center. And with the ripples came sound, that same melodic, structured pattern we'd heard in the recordings, but louder, clearer, unmistakably directed at us. "Jack," Martinez said urgently, backing away from the water, "we need to go, now." But I couldn't move. The sound was speaking to me, not just compelling movement, but communicating meaning. For the first time, I understood fragments of what it was saying, not in words exactly, but in concepts that formed in my mind as I listened. Old blood returns. The deep remembers. The invitation stands. "Jack!" Martinez's voice seemed distant, muffled beneath the entity's song. I felt her hand on my arm, pulling me back, but it was like moving through molasses. Something was emerging from the center of the pool, a disturbance in the water that rose higher, taking form. Not the elongated pale hand I'd glimpsed at Echo Lake and Deadman's Gorge, but something larger, more defined. A figure rising from the depths, water cascading from its form. I caught only glimpses, glistening skin the color of lake-bottom silt, eyes that reflected our headlamps with an inner light of their own, a body proportioned like a human but wrong somehow, adapted for water rather than land. Martinez was shouting now, the silver compass held out before her like a shield. The entity paused, its form partially emerged from the pool, those luminous eyes fixed on us. No, not on us, on me specifically. "Edward's blood," the cycle continues. "Will you listen where he would not?" The meaning formed in my mind with perfect clarity. My grandfather had come here seeking understanding, but something had happened, something that made him warn me away from the water in his letter. With tremendous effort, I broke the entity's compulsion, stepping backward while maintaining eye contact with the figure in the pool. "What did you show him?" I demanded aloud. "What did he see that made him fear you?" The entity's response came not as sound, but as images that bloomed in my mind, glimpses of a vast, ancient civilization beneath Black River's waters. Structures that defied human architectural understanding, beings that moved through water as easily as we move through air, knowledge accumulated over millennia, and humans among them. Changed humans adapted to water, no longer fully the people they had been. Your grandfather saw our truth. He was not ready. Are you? Martinez's silver compass swung wildly in her hand, the needle spinning as if caught in a magnetic storm. The entity noticed the movement, its attention shifting momentarily from me to her. That break in concentration was enough. I grabbed Martinez's arm and pulled her toward the cavern wall where we'd descended. "Climb!" I shouted. "Now!" We scrambled up the rock face, the entity's song rising to a crescendo behind us. The water in the pool surged upward, reaching for us like a living thing, but falling short of the height we'd already gained. As we climbed frantically toward the fissure above, I glanced back once. The entity had fully emerged from the pool, standing at its edge, a figure both familiar and utterly alien, neither fully human nor completely other. It raised an elongated hand in what might have been a farewell or a promise. "We will meet again, Jack Harmon. The water is patient, and you will return to the confluence." We didn't stop climbing until we reached the surface, bursting from the fissure into the late afternoon sunlight. Without a word, we gathered our equipment and began the long hike back to the vehicle, putting as much distance as possible between ourselves and the confluence. Only when we reached the service road did Martinez finally speak. "What was that thing, Jack? What did it show you?" I struggled to articulate what I'd experienced. "It's older than we thought. Not just a predator, but something intelligent, organized. It's been beneath Black River for thousands of years, building something down there. And it's been changing people, adapting them. For what purpose? I don't know. But my grandfather saw it too. Whatever it showed him was enough to make him warn me away from the water for the rest of his life." As we drove back toward the ranger station, both our phones buzzed simultaneously. The message was the same on each screen. "The invitation remains open. The deep has much to show you." I turned off my phone, but the entity's final words in the cavern continued to echo in my mind. "The water is patient, and you will return to the confluence." The most disturbing part was the certainty I felt that it was right. The human mind isn't built to accommodate certain types of knowledge. After our encounter at the confluence, I found myself struggling to reconcile what I'd seen with the rational world I thought I understood. The entity beneath Black River wasn't just some predatory creature. It was intelligent, ancient, and part of something far larger than I had imagined. Martinez and I agreed to keep our expedition to the confluence between ourselves for the time being, not out of fear of disciplinary action, but because we needed time to process what we'd witnessed, to determine what it meant for Black River and those who went missing in its waters. 3 days after our return, a new search and rescue call came in. A photographer named Diane Langtree, last seen taking pictures near Stillwater Creek. Her car was found at the trailhead, camera equipment missing, presumed to have been with her on the hike. Peterson assigned me as lead for the search team, with Rollins and Martinez as support. As we gathered our gear, I caught Martinez's eye. This was the first missing person case near water since our discovery at the confluence. We both knew this wasn't just another routine search. We arrived at Stillwater Creek by mid-morning, setting up our search grid from the location where Langtree's hiking boots had been found, neatly placed at the creek's edge, just like the Jenkins family's shoes at Echo Lake. The pattern was becoming disturbingly familiar. "Standard protocol," I told the team. "Grid search outward from the last known location. Martinez, you and Sampson take the north shore. Rollins and I will cover the south." As the others moved into position, I knelt beside the creek, studying the water but keeping a safe distance. After what I'd seen at the confluence, I viewed these connected waterways differently, not as isolated features, but as extensions of something vast and intelligent that spread throughout Black River like a nervous system. The search progressed methodically through the day, but yielded nothing beyond Langtree's abandoned boots. No tracks leading away from the creek, no signs of struggle, no equipment dropped along a trail. It was as if she had stepped into the water and simply ceased to exist. As dusk approached, Peterson radioed for us to return to base. Rule 1 still applied, regardless of our growing knowledge about the entity. But as Martinez and I packed up our gear, I noticed something unusual floating at the edge of the creek. A memory card, the kind used in professional cameras. Using a stick, I carefully retrieved it without touching the water. The card was dry and undamaged, as if it had been deliberately placed rather than accidentally dropped. "Could be Langtree's," Martinez observed. "We should get it back to the station, see if there's anything recoverable." Back at the ranger station, Peterson connected the memory card to a secure computer. It contained dozens of photographs, the most recent time-stamped from the day Langtree disappeared. The earlier images were typical nature photography, landscapes, wildlife, botanical close-ups. But the final sequence, taken at Stillwater Creek, showed something else entirely. The first few were normal shots of the creek, capturing the play of light on water, the surrounding forest. Then the focus shifted to the water itself, as if Langtree had become fixated on something beneath the surface. The images grew progressively more abstract, blurred motion, strange light patterns, shapes that seemed to be emerging from the depths. The very last photograph made my blood run cold. It showed a humanoid figure standing waist-deep in the creek, facing the camera. The image was slightly out of focus, the figure's features indistinct, but two details were clear: its elongated, webbed hands reaching toward the photographer, and its eyes, reflective, luminous, the same eyes I had seen at the confluence. "She photographed it," I said quietly. The entity showed itself to her. Peterson studied the image for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "This changes things," he finally said. "We've had glimpses before, partial sightings, but never anything this clear." "What do we do now?" Martinez asked. "This is evidence of something that shouldn't exist." "We continue the search," Peterson replied, ejecting the memory card and securing it in an evidence envelope, "but with a different understanding of what we're dealing with." That night, unable to sleep, I drove back to the ranger station and used my access code to retrieve Langtree's memory card. I needed to study that final image more carefully, to compare what she had captured with what I had seen at the confluence. The station was deserted at that hour, just the security lights casting long shadows through the empty rooms. I sat up at my desk, inserted the card into my laptop, and began examining the photographs again. Something caught my attention in the sequence leading up to the final image, a pattern I hadn't noticed earlier. In each successive photo, there was a subtle reflection in the water, a face partially visible among the ripples and light patterns. At first I thought it was Langtree's own reflection as she leaned over the creek with her camera. But as I enhanced the images, I realized it was someone else entirely, someone I recognized. Diane Langtree hadn't been alone at Stillwater Creek. She'd been with Jason Collins, the geology student who had disappeared near Deadman's Gorge 3 years earlier and never been found. His face was different somehow, paler, with a suggestion of those gill-like features I'd seen in the petroglyphs, but it was unmistakably Collins. He appeared to be just beneath the surface of the creek, watching Langtree as she photographed the water. I sat back trying to process this discovery. Collins hadn't simply vanished. He'd been changed, adapted, as the entity had shown me at the confluence. And now he was back, visible in these photographs taken just before another disappearance. As I stared at the screen, my phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unknown, but I knew who it was from before I even read the contents. "She came willingly, Jack, as they all do, eventually. She saw what waits beneath and chose to learn more." I didn't respond. Instead, I copied the photographs to a secure drive and returned the original memory card to the evidence locker. This discovery was too significant to share immediately, even with Peterson. I needed to understand what it meant first. The next morning, I pulled Martinez aside before the search resumed. "I found something on Langtree's memory card," I told her quietly, showing her the enhanced images on my phone. "She wasn't alone at the creek. Look who's in the reflection." Martinez studied the images, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. "That's Collins, the missing geology student?" I nodded. "Changed, but definitely him. And he's watching her from beneath the surface." "So they don't just disappear," Martinez whispered. "They're recruited, converted?" The entity showed me glimpses of this at the confluence. Humans who had been adapted for water. I think that's what happens to some of the people who go missing. They become part of whatever civilization exists down there. But why? What does it want with them? Before I could answer, Peterson approached, ending our private conversation. "Teams are ready to move out. We're expanding the search radius today, focusing on possible exit points from the watershed." The day's search was as fruitless as the first. No sign of Langtree beyond her abandoned boots and the memory card we'd found. As we prepared to return to base for the evening, Peterson received a call that changed everything. Highway Patrol just reported a woman walking along Route 16, he announced, the familiar location sending a chill through me. Description matches Langtree. They're bringing her to County General now. Just like the Anderson boys, just like the Jenkins family, just like my grandfather decades earlier. The pattern was holding. Some who disappeared returned, found walking along the same stretch of highway that paralleled Black River's watershed. We met Langtree at the hospital, where she was being treated for dehydration and exposure. Like the others, she had no memory of the days she'd been missing, no explanation for how she'd traveled miles from Stillwater Creek without her shoes or equipment. The last thing I remember is taking photographs by the creek, she told us, her voice hoarse, eyes unfocused. The water was moving strangely. There were patterns in it, almost like writing, and I thought I saw someone watching me from beneath the surface. I showed her the final photograph from her memory card, the humanoid figure reaching toward the camera. Is this what you saw? Langtree stared at the image, her expression blank. I don't remember taking this. I don't remember any of it. But there was something in her eyes as she said it, a flicker of recognition quickly suppressed, a hint of fear, or perhaps something else entirely. She was hiding something. As we left her room, a nurse pulled me aside. You should know, she said quietly. We found unusual marks on her ankles during the examination. 3 parallel lines like puncture wounds, but with no entry point. And her blood work showed elevated levels of a compound we can't identify. Something that affects oxygen absorption in the cells. The same marks that had been found on the Anderson boys and the Jenkins family. But this was the first I'd heard of unusual blood chemistry. Can I see the lab results? I asked. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. I shouldn't do this, but there's something not right about her case. The doctors are puzzled. The lab report showed dramatic changes in Langtree's blood, increased red blood cell count, altered hemoglobin structure, and the presence of an unknown compound that the report suggested might be a naturally occurring antifreeze-like substance, similar to what's found in certain deep-sea fish. Physiological adaptations for surviving in cold, deep water. I shared my findings with Martinez as we drove back to the ranger station. Her body was being changed, I explained. The process had already begun. But it stopped when she was returned? Martinez asked. Or was she returned because the changes didn't take properly? It was a good question, one I couldn't answer yet. But it suggested a disturbing possibility that the entity was selective about who it kept and who it returned, that there was a purpose behind these abductions beyond simple predation. Back at the station, Peterson was waiting with news of his own. County sheriff just called. They found Langtree's camera equipment. His expression was grim. It was in Jason Collins' university apartment. The place has been locked and undisturbed since he disappeared 3 years ago. This made no sense. How could Langtree's equipment, lost just days ago, end up in the abandoned apartment of a man who had vanished years earlier? There's more, Peterson continued. They found a journal hidden under a floorboard. Recent entries, in Collins' handwriting, describing a community beneath Black River's waters. People living down there, changed to survive underwater. He called them the adapted. The pieces were starting to fit together. Collins hadn't simply disappeared. He had become one of these adapted, living beneath Black River's waters. And somehow, he had returned to the surface world temporarily, encountered Langtree, and taken her camera equipment back to his old apartment. We need to see that journal, I said. Peterson nodded. Sheriff's bringing it over now. But Jack, if what's in there is true, this goes beyond anything we've dealt with before. The journal arrived an hour later, sealed in an evidence bag. Peterson, Martinez, and I gathered in the conference room to examine it, closing the blinds and locking the door. What we were about to read wasn't for general knowledge. Collins's journal was a standard academic notebook, the kind used for field observations. The earlier entries were typical research notes about Black River's geological features. But about halfway through, the tone changed dramatically. The handwriting became more rushed, excited. August 15th, found unusual acoustic anomalies at the pool in Deadman's Gorge, sound patterns that don't match any known natural source. When analyzed, they show structures similar to language, Syntax, repetition, variation. Something is communicating down there. The entries continued, describing Colin's growing obsession with the sounds from beneath the water. He began spending nights at the gorge, recording continuously, trying to decipher the patterns. Then came the entry that changed everything. August 29th. They've noticed me. Today, one of them emerged partially from the pool, humanoid but clearly adapted for aquatic life. It spoke to me, not in words, but directly into my mind. They've been watching us for centuries, studying us. They say they were here long before humans, that they retreated beneath the water when our ancestors first arrived. They've created a civilization down there, in caverns and tunnels that stretch for miles beneath the forest. And they want to share it with me. They say I have the right qualities: curiosity, intelligence, an affinity for water. They can change me, adapt me to live with them. I'm going back tomorrow. I'm going to accept their invitation. That was the last entry from Colin's original disappearance. But after several blank pages, the journal resumed with entries dated just weeks ago. The handwriting subtly changed, more flowing, less angular. October 2nd. Returning to the surface is difficult now. My lungs struggle with the dry air. My skin cracks in the sunlight. But I need to record what I've learned, to leave some account of the world beneath Black River. We are many now, dozens of adapted living in the underwater caverns, learning from the original ones who have been there for millennia. They need us because they cannot leave the water at all anymore. We are their bridge to the surface world, their eyes and hands above. October 10th. I'm not the only one who returns occasionally. Edward Harmon comes and goes as well, though he disappeared decades ago. He says his grandson will join us eventually. The bloodline is marked, the affinity for water passed down through generations. Others come back too, for brief periods. Some to observe, some to guide new candidates down. The photographer will be suitable, I think. She has the right kind of curiosity, the willingness to look beneath the surface. The final entry was dated just 3 days ago. October 28th. The changes are accelerating in me. Soon I won't be able to return to the surface at all. This will be my last journey up. I've left the photographer's equipment in my old apartment along with this journal. Someone will find it eventually. Perhaps Jack Harmon, when he comes looking for answers about his grandfather. The original ones speak of him often. They say he's resisting the call, but the water is patient, and blood always returns to the deep in the end. We sat in stunned silence after reading the final page. The implications were staggering. Not just an entity living beneath Black River, but an entire civilization of beings who had been there for millennia. And humans who had been changed to join them, including Colin's, including, apparently, my grandfather. This can't be real, Martinez finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's too impossible, Peterson supplied. After what you've seen at the confluence? After the photograph Langtree took? I was still stuck on the reference to my grandfather. Edward Harmon comes and goes as well, though he disappeared decades ago. According to the official record, my grandfather had died of a heart attack years after his mysterious week-long disappearance. But Collins's journal suggested he was still alive, in some form, beneath Black River's waters. We need to verify this, I said, pulling myself back to the present. Check with the lab that analyzed Langtree's blood. See if the changes they found match what would be needed for underwater adaptation. Peterson nodded. I'll make the calls. But Jack, if this is true, if there really is an entire community of these adapted beneath Black River, what do we do about it? It was a question I had no answer for. Our job was to find missing persons, to bring them home safely. But what if some of them didn't want to come back? What if they had chosen to become something else entirely? And most disturbing of all, what if my grandfather was among them, waiting for me to join him beneath the water? As if reading my thoughts, Peterson placed a hand on my shoulder. Whatever's down there, whatever it's doing, you don't have to face it alone. Remember that. But as we left the conference room, my phone buzzed with another text from that familiar unknown number. He waits for you, Jack. Edward Harmon remembers his grandson. The water connects all things, even across generations. Come see for yourself. The entity, or perhaps Collins, or some other adapted serving as its messenger, was growing more insistent. And despite everything I knew about the dangers, despite the rules I'd learned, and the warnings in my grandfather's letter, I found myself wondering, what if I did go to the water willingly? What if I did see for myself what lay beneath Black River's surface? What if I met my grandfather again after all these years? The thought was both terrifying and strangely compelling, the perfect lure for someone like me. They say when you stare into the abyss stares back. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the abyss recognizes you. It knows your name, your history, your bloodline, and it calls to you in a voice that echoes through generations. In the week following our discovery of Collins's journal, I struggled with what I had learned. My grandfather, the man who had warned me to stay away from Black River's waters, was reportedly still alive in some form beneath the surface. One of the adapted, changed to survive underwater, part of a community that had existed in secret for decades, perhaps centuries. The text continued, growing more frequent, more personal. He speaks of you often, Jack, of teaching you to fish in Stillwater Creek when you were small, of the toy boat he carved for your 8th birthday. Details no one else could know. Memories I shared only with my grandfather. He regrets the warning he sent you. He didn't understand then what he knows now. The gift that waits beneath the water. I didn't respond to the messages, but I couldn't ignore them either. The entity, or whoever was sending them, knew exactly how to reach me, which emotional strings to pull. Martinez noticed my preoccupation during our shifts. "You're thinking about going down there, aren't you?" she asked bluntly one evening as we completed our patrol reports. "To find your grandfather." I couldn't deny it. "Wouldn't you, if it was someone you loved?" she sighed. "Jack, we've seen what this thing does. It takes people, changes them. Whatever is down there might have your grandfather's memories, might even think it is him, but what if it is him?" I countered. "What if he's been alive all this time trying to reach out? Collins' journal said he comes and goes. What if he's been watching me, waiting for the right moment?" Martinez had no answer for that. None of us did. We were in uncharted territory, dealing with something beyond our understanding of what was possible. Peterson called me into his office the next morning. He looked tired, the weight of recent discoveries evident in the new lines on his face. "Lab results came back on Langtree's blood samples," he said without preamble. "The unknown compound is a protein that alters cellular respiration, allows for oxygen absorption in low-oxygen environments, similar to what's found in certain deep-sea creatures." "Adaptations for underwater survival," I said. "Just like Collins described in his journal." Peterson nodded. "There's more. I've been reviewing historical medical records for returned missing persons going back decades. Most were destroyed or incomplete, but I found consistent patterns, similar cellular changes, unusual protein markers, those distinctive marks around the ankles, all temporary, fading within days of their return. So the changes can be reversed? Or intentionally halted, Peterson suggested. If Collins is right, the entity, the original ones as he called them, are selective about who they keep. The physiological changes begin, but they only become permanent for those deemed suitable. I thought of Langtree, the Jenkins family, the Anderson boys. All returned with partial adaptations that faded over time. Rejected, perhaps. Not right for whatever purpose the underwater civilization had in mind. But my grandfather had been kept, and Collins, and who knew how many others over the decades. "There's something else," Peterson said, his voice dropping lower. "I've been authorized to tell you that your grandmother didn't die of natural causes as you were told." This caught me completely off guard. "What?" 3 years after your grandfather disappeared and returned that first time, your grandmother vanished near Echo Lake. Unlike your grandfather, she was never found. Peterson's eyes held mine steadily. "The report was classified, the official story changed to protect you and your mother, but I thought you should know now, given everything that's happening." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My grandmother, whom I'd been told had died of cancer before I was born, had actually disappeared in Black River, possibly taken by the same entity that had claimed my grandfather. "Why tell me this now?" I asked, my voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Because you need all the facts before you make a decision, Jack. I've seen that look in your eyes. You're considering going to the water, trying to find your grandfather. I can't stop you, but I can make sure you understand what you're walking into." He was right. Despite all the warnings, all the rules, all the evidence of danger, I had been contemplating exactly that. The pull of family, of answers, of resolution was becoming irresistible. "What would you do?" I asked him quietly. Peterson considered this for a long moment. "I'd remember that whatever is down there, whatever it shows you or tells you, it has its own agenda. It's been taking people from Black River for generations. It's patient, intelligent, and utterly alien to our way of thinking." He paused. "But I also know what it's like to lose family and never get answers. Sometimes not knowing is the worst part." I left Peterson's office with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that I would ultimately have to face the entity on its own territory to find the truth. That night, alone in my cabin, I reread my grandfather's letter for perhaps the 100th time, searching for clues, for some hint that might contradict Colin's journal. Had my grandfather truly regretted his warning to stay away from the water? Or was the entity using his memories, his identity, to lure me in? The next text arrived just after midnight. "She is here too, Jack. Your grandmother. They are together, waiting. The family can be reunited in the deep." My grandmother, the woman I'd never known, whose true fate I'd only just learned. The entity was escalating its tactics, using every emotional connection it could identify. I made my decision then. I would go to the water, but not blindly, not unprepared. I would face whatever waited beneath Black River's surface, but on my own terms. The following morning I requested 3 days personal leave citing family matters. Peterson approved it without comment, though his eyes told me he knew exactly what I intended. I spent the first day making preparations, studying maps of the underwater cave systems, gathering specialized equipment, writing detailed letters to be delivered if I didn't return. One to Peterson explaining my decision, one to Martinez thanking her for her partnership and friendship, and one to my mother, telling her the truth about her parents. Truth she deserved to know, whatever happened to me. The second day, I visited Martinez at her home, away from the ranger station where we might be overheard. "I'm going," I told her simply. She nodded, unsurprised. "Where?" "The confluence, tomorrow night." Martinez was silent for a long moment. "I can't talk you out of this, can I?" "Would you try if it was your family down there?" She sighed. "No, but I'd want someone watching my back." She met my gaze steadily. "I'm coming with you." I shook my head. "Not into the water. But yes, I could use someone on shore. Someone who knows where I've gone, what I'm looking for. Someone who can report what happens, one way or another." We spent hours planning the details, equipment, communications, emergency protocols. If I was going to do this, I would do it as safely as possible, though we both knew there was nothing truly safe about what I was attempting. The final text came that night, as if the entity knew what I had decided. "Tomorrow then, Jack Harmon, at the confluence, the water welcomes you home." The day of my descent dawned clear and cold, the November air crisp with the promise of the winter to come. I spent the morning reviewing my equipment one last time, a specialized dive suit designed for cave exploration, an underwater communication system that Martinez would monitor from shore, emergency oxygen supplies, and my grandfather's silver pocket watch, the one tangible connection to the man I hoped to find. As the sun began to set, Martinez and I made our way to Devil's Backbone, following the same route we'd taken to the confluence weeks earlier. The forest was quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. We reached the fissure entrance just as darkness fell completely. The narrow crack in the rock face seemed to absorb our headlamp beams, a black mouth leading down into the earth. "Last chance to reconsider," Martinez said as I prepared my equipment. I shook my head. "I need to know, Elena. One way or another, I need to see for myself." She nodded, helping me check my dive suit seals and communication system. "The moment anything feels wrong, you abort. Promise me." "I promise." But we both knew there was a point beyond which promises wouldn't matter, a point where the entity's influence might override my own will. We descended through the fissure into the vast underground chamber below, our headlamps illuminating the path we'd followed before. The sound of converging streams echoed through the cavern, louder now than during our previous visit, as if the waters were flowing more vigorously. As we approached the confluence, the circular pool at the chamber's center, I felt it immediately. That familiar pull, the compulsion to move toward the water. But this time I didn't resist. I had come here deliberately, willingly. The pool's surface was no longer still as it had been during our first visit. It rippled with subtle movement, concentric circles spreading outward from the center, though there was no apparent cause for the disturbance. "It knows we're here," Martinez whispered, her hand moving instinctively to the silver compass she carried. "It's been waiting." I nodded, unable to take my eyes off the water. "Set up the communication relay. I'll prepare to enter." As Martinez established our equipment on a rocky ledge well back from the pool's edge, I completed my final checks: dive mask, oxygen supply, underwater lights. The specialized suit would protect me from the cold and pressure, but nothing could shield me from whatever waited beneath the surface. "Communication check." Martinez's voice came through the earpiece built into my dive mask. "Receiving you clearly," I confirmed. "Recording system active?" "Active and backing up to secure storage. Whatever you see down there, we'll have a record of it." I approached the edge of the pool, feeling the pull growing stronger with each step. The water seemed to reach for me, ripples accelerating toward the shore where I stood. "Jack," Martinez called from her position at the relay. "There's movement in the water." I saw it too, shapes moving beneath the surface, indistinct but unmistakably present. Multiple entities, circling, waiting. The familiar melodic sound began to emanate from the pool. That strange underwater singing that bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the chest. But now, after all I had learned, after all I had experienced, the sound began to resolve into something more defined, not quite words, but concepts, meanings that formed in my mind. "Welcome, blood of Edward. The circle completes, the family reunites." I activated my mask's recording system, determined to document whatever I encountered. "I'm going in," I told Martinez. "Maintain contact. If I don't respond for more than 5 minutes, follow the emergency protocols we established." "Understood. Be careful, Jack." I stepped into the confluence. The water was surprisingly warm, enveloping me like living silk. As I submerged completely, the sounds intensified, becoming clearer, more structured. My dive lights illuminated the pool, revealing it to be much deeper than it had appeared from the surface, a vertical shaft descending into darkness below. And there, circling the perimeter of the shaft, were the entities. Multiple figures, humanoid but clearly adapted for water, elongated limbs, webbed hands and feet, skin that ranged from pale translucence to deep blue-gray. Their eyes reflected my lights with an inner luminescence, tracking my movements as I descended. "Welcome, Jack Harmon. We have waited long for this meeting." The thought voice was stronger now, more distinct. I couldn't identify which of the entities it came from. Perhaps all of them, perhaps none. It seemed to originate from the water itself. "Where is my grandfather?" I asked, my voice distorted by the dive mask but still audible through the water. "Edward Harmon. Collins's journal said he was here." The entities circled closer, their movements fluid and graceful. One detached from the group, approaching me directly. Unlike the others, this one's features were more recognizably human, though still altered for underwater existence. And as it drew nearer, I felt a shock of recognition that transcended the physical changes. The eyes. I knew those eyes. "Grandfather," I whispered. The entity, the man, nodded slowly, a gesture that seemed both familiar and alien in this underwater context. His mouth moved, but instead of words, I felt the thoughts form directly in my mind. "Jack. My boy. You've grown so much." The voice in my head had the same cadence, the same warmth I remembered from childhood. Despite the inhuman appearance, despite everything I knew about the entity's ability to mimic and manipulate, I couldn't deny the recognition that resonated through me. "Is it really you?" I asked, my voice breaking despite the mechanical filter of the dive mask. "Yes and no, I am Edward Harmon, but I am also more now. Changed, adapted, as all must be who choose to remain in the deep. Choose? I repeated. You chose this? Eventually, not at first. At first I resisted, as you have. I returned to the surface, tried to forget what I had seen beneath the water. I even warned you away. The thought voice carried a weight of regret. But the call of the deep never faded. And when your grandmother was taken, I returned willingly to find her. Grandmother is here too? I asked, scanning the circling entities for another familiar presence. She is deeper now, one of the fully adapted, beyond the form you would recognize, but still herself, in the ways that matter. I struggled to process what I was seeing, what I was feeling. The entity before me, I couldn't think of it simply as my grandfather, despite the familiar consciousness it projected, gestured toward the shaft descending below us. Come. There is much to show you. The city below. The civilization that has existed here since before humans walked these forests. Martinez's voice crackled in my earpiece, reminding me that I wasn't alone. Jack, your vitals are elevated. What's happening? I've made contact, I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. It appears to be my grandfather, or something with his memories, his consciousness. Be careful, she warned. Remember what Peterson said. Whatever's down there has its own agenda. The entity that had been Edward Harmon tilted its head, as if hearing Martinez's warning despite the private communication system. Your friend is wise to be cautious. We are not what you are. Our purposes are not human purposes. But we do not wish you harm, Jack. We wish to share knowledge, to grow, to adapt, as we have for millennia. Why take people? I demanded. Why change them? We do not take. We invite. We show what is possible. Some accept, like your grandfather, like Collins. Others are not suitable or not willing. They are returned. The ones with the marks on their ankles, the partial adaptations that fade. Yes. The process begins for all who enter the deep waters, but it only completes for those who embrace it fully, who choose to remain. I thought of the Jenkins family, the Anderson boys, Langtree. All returned to the surface, their bodies partially changed but reverting back to fully human, rejected, or simply unwilling to accept what was offered. And what's being offered to me now? I asked, already knowing the answer. The same choice given to all who are called by the water, to see the city below, to learn our ways, to decide if you wish to adapt and remain, or return to the surface unchanged. Martinez's voice came through again, more urgent now. Jack, your oxygen levels are dropping faster than they should be. Something's affecting your equipment. You need to surface soon. The entity gestured toward my dive gear. Your technology is limited. It cannot sustain you much longer in our realm. Make your choice, Jack Harmon. Come deeper. Begin the adaptation that will allow you to breathe the water as we do. Or return to the surface now, perhaps forever. It was the moment of truth, the decision I had come here to make. To trust this entity, this thing that claimed to be my grandfather, and follow it into the depths. To see the underwater civilization it described, to potentially be reunited with my long-lost family. But at what cost? What would I become if I accepted? Jack. Martinez's voice was sharp with concern. Oxygen critical in 10 minutes. You need to start ascending now. The entity that had been Edward Harmon extended a webbed hand toward me. The water remembers bloodlines, Jack. You have always belonged here, in the deep. Your grandfather, your grandmother. Now you. The family reunited at last. I stared at the offered hand, feeling the pull of family, of answers, of belonging. The temptation to accept was almost overwhelming. But something held me back. A memory of my grandfather's letter, written after he had supposedly embraced this underwater existence. Stay safe, Jack. Stay away from the water. If he had truly accepted this new life, truly wanted me to join him, why send such a warning? Why not an invitation instead? I backed away from the outstretched hand. No. Whatever you are, whatever you've shown me, I'm not ready to make that choice. The entity's expression shifted, something like disappointment passing across features that were both familiar and alien. The call of the deep does not fade, Jack Harmon. You will return to us, in time. The water is patient. Maybe, I acknowledged. But today, I'm going back to the surface. I began to ascend, watching as the entity that wore my grandfather's identity drifted back to join the others circling below. Their thought voices followed me upward. Until next time, Blood of Edward, the water remembers. The water waits. As I broke the surface of the confluence, Martinez was already at the edge, ready to help me out. Thank God, she said, assisting me onto the rocky shore. Your oxygen was almost depleted. What happened down there? I removed my dive mask, taking deep breaths of the cave's damp air. I saw something. It had my grandfather's memories, his mannerisms. It spoke inside my mind. Did you believe it was him? She asked, helping me remove the dive equipment. I don't know, I admitted. It knew things only he would know. It felt like him, in some essential way, but also different, changed. And the underwater city it mentioned? I didn't go deeper to see it. Something didn't feel right. I described the contradiction between the entity's invitation and my grandfather's written warning. If he truly wanted me to join him there, why tell me to stay away from the water? Martinez nodded thoughtfully. Maybe part of him was still fighting the influence. Or maybe the letter was genuine, and what's down there now is just using his memories, his identity. We gathered our equipment and began the long climb back to the surface world, both of us quiet, contemplative. I had gone seeking answers but had found only more questions, more mysteries. As we emerged from the fissure into the night air, my phone buzzed in the waterproof case where I'd stored it. A final message from the entity. The door remains open, Jack Harmon. Your true family waits below. In time, you will return to the deep. I showed the message to Martinez, who frowned. It's not giving up on you. No, I agreed. And maybe it's right. Maybe I will go back someday, when I understand more, when I'm ready to face whatever truth waits down there. I looked back at the fissure entrance, thinking of the circular pool far below and the beings that circled within it. But not today. We made our way back through the dark forest toward the service road where we'd parked. The night was clear, stars sharp overhead, the world above ground solid and reassuringly normal after what I'd witnessed beneath. But as we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just by the entities below, but by the forest itself. By the streams and creeks that flowed through it, by the rain that fell upon it, by all the connected waterways that led eventually back to the confluence. The water remembers. The water waits. I touched my grandfather's silver pocket watch, drawing comfort from its solid presence. Whatever waited beneath Black River's waters, whether my actual family transformed into something else, or entities simply using their memories and identities as lures, I had resisted its call for now. But the entity had been right about one thing. The pull hadn't faded. If anything, having seen what existed below, having communicated with the being that claimed to be my grandfather, the call of the deep was stronger than ever. I am Jack Harmon, Search and Rescue Officer for the U.S. Forest Service. I've seen things in Black River that defy explanation, things that haunt my dreams and whisper in the back of my mind on rainy nights. I've looked into the abyss, and it has not only looked back, it has recognized me, called me by name, invited me to join it. And the most terrifying truth of all? Part of me still wants to accept.